Our next speaker is Bradley Rink from the Department of Geography, and he has been engaged with various online interventions for both his undergraduate and postgraduate modules. And yeah, so today he's going to speak about also formative assessments using the LMS. Okay, thank you, Bradley.
Good morning, colleagues. It's nice to follow up from the previous presenters, because I'm also going to be talking about assessment using Sakai. I've titled my talk Formative Assessment MCQs in Sakai, an unlikely partnership, with a question mark, because many colleagues and students themselves have questioned whether or not we can actually use Sakai as a platform for assessment. They think of the learning platforms such as Sakai as just a place to deposit learning material, a place to get readings, a place to interact via messages and announcements. But in fact, it becomes, I think, a really useful platform for assessment. So that's what I'll be talking about. The work I'm also going to be talking about emanates from two recent pieces of research that I've done. Those of you who were yesterday at the tutor symposium, also I spoke about these too, but in this case the handbook of teaching and learning in geography is the one that I'll be speaking about most, where I talk about assessing learning for the masses, because the context that we're talking about here is large classes, large class sizes. So I'll give a bit of the context. GES 111, which is Introduction to Human Geography, and talk a bit about assessment, particularly diagnostic and formative assessment that I use in the context of this module, and then question this idea of the unlikely partnership. It's important to understand what the context is in terms of the module itself. So Introduction to Human Geography is, as the name implies, an introductory module which is introducing students to the relationships between humans and their environments. We're getting students, some of which who have had geography in matric, others who have not. So there's this interesting mix of comfort and discomfort, trepidation and excitement among students when they enter this module. It's also their first semester, first year, and so I'm getting them fresh out of the box, and it has its challenges and its opportunities as well. So you can actually deliver assessment in novel ways that for many of them is comforting, because they're used to interacting on mobile platforms and the like. So it's important to talk about the learning goals of this particular module. Principally, it is to illustrate the relationships between humans and their environments, between society and space. So I want them to question cities, rural areas, relationships between humans and the built environment, nature, society, and so forth. So it's all about relationships that we're talking about. The context is also one of a large classroom. Now, large for me is trending toward 400 students. Now, I know for some 400 is small. I'm looking at you, Thelma. Where the numbers in psychology are double that, I think, or trouble that. Okay. But for me, the large classroom is 400 students. So we're talking about S1 filled to the brim. Students sitting on the stairs in S1. So it's a large classroom. There are challenges in the large classroom, both for students and for lecturers. So for students, the context of a large classroom can potentially lead to disengagement. Disengagement with content, disengagement with the lecturer, as they are part of a sea of other students. And in fact, they get sort of drowned out in this sea. They they sort of feel insignificant because they don't have an opportunity to interact directly, oftentimes with the lecturer, and so they feel one of the crowd. Similarly, for the lecturer, large class environment and large class pedagogy, known as LCP, is challenging because of that same reason, the inability to interact directly with individual students. Oftentimes, given the architecture of a lecture theater, where you're really separated from the learning process and students. But of course, assessment is important. And there are many kinds of assessment that are important in this context. Firstly, diagnostic assessment. So I'm quite interested in understanding, because I have a diverse range of students, some with and without geography in matric, I want to know what they're bringing into the classroom. I want to understand who my students are. So I use Sakai as a means of diagnostically understanding where they are with their understanding of human-environment relationships. So I use polls to try to understand that. And that gives me a sense of who they are and what they bring to the table. But more importantly, I'm going to talk about formative assessment and how I use that. The critical part of formative assessment being feedback. And that, of course, is a principal challenge of large class pedagogy. Firstly, how do you mark 400 class tests or prac submissions over and over and over again every single week? For a single lecture, because I teach this module on my own, it's extremely difficult. So one challenge of marking the assessment, but actually the more important challenge is providing good quality feedback. Because as Nicola McFarland-Dick note, it is actually in the provision of feedback where the learning takes place. Learning takes place because feedback helps to clarify the standard of learning that is expected. It helps to model good practice and the learning itself. It actually provides motivation and self-esteem to students, particularly when they're not performing up to a standard. So it allows them to continue to learn and to reach the level of desired performance, rather than just telling them that they're not performing, whether you are or you're not. Good assessment will be much more detailed than that. So in that regard, I use the Sakai platform. This is just a screenshot of the GS111 site. And I use it particularly in preparing students for class tests. So in the actual class tests that I deliver, which are 2 during the semester, as well as the practice tests. So I'll give you an example of the practice test itself. In the practice test, students can take the test as many times as they wish during the open period, which is generally a week for a practice test. The important part of the setup that I create in Sakai, also using question pools, is to provide answer feedback. So when a student provides an incorrect answer, they get detailed feedback as to why the correct answer would be as it is. And they have an opportunity to do that again and again and again. When it comes to the actual test itself, once the tests are completed and all submitted, they will also get correct answer feedback and incorrect answer feedback. Now this obviously takes a long time to set up in Sakai, but once it's set up, it's quite useful. As I wrap up, sorry, I'm very short on time, I realize. Thank you to the timekeeper. I just wanted to reflect on what I call the GES111 super users. These super users demonstrate the importance of feedback. So while all the students engaged in the practice test, there was a small subset, which I call super users, that completed practice tests more than 3 times. During the practice test periods. And of that subset, of the 2018 cohort, their final test marks were 13 marks higher than the class average. And it's because they continually use the feedback to learn and to apply to their learning, right? So of this group, their final practice test marks were 100%. And then their actual test marks were 13 marks above. So what it demonstrates is the importance of feedback, which would be impossible on a little fill-in-the-oval scanned MCQ test. So to wrap up, no time for discussion now. This partnership is actually quite a useful one. It's demonstrated by the super users, and one that I'll keep gathering data on and doing, which we'll do, of course, for the benefit of the students. So, thank you.